Chicago, 1982. A city of 3 million wakes to an invisible killer. In homes across the suburbs, Elk Grove Village, Arlington Heights, Lombard, people are dying. No struggle, no warning. Just pain, collapse, and silence. In the span of a few hours, 7 people will be dead, all connected by something so ordinary it sits in every household medicine cabinet in America. Extra-Strength Tylenol. This is a story of how a handful of capsules sent an entire nation into panic, and how the mystery of who poisoned them remains unsolved to this day. Before we begin, if you appreciate deeply researched true crime stories like this one, subscribe. It helps us continue to uncover cases that change the world forever. It begins quietly. 7 a.m., Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, wakes up in her family's home in Elk Grove Village. She's got a sore throat and a runny nose, nothing serious. Her father, Dennis, tells her to take a Tylenol capsule and get some rest before school. Moments later, he hears a thud. Dennis rushes to the bathroom. The door is closed. He calls out. No answer. When he opens it, Mary is on the floor. Her body is limp, eyes glassy, breathing gone. He calls 911, frantic. Paramedics arrive within minutes. But it's too late. Mary is pronounced dead at the hospital not long after. Doctors are puzzled. A healthy child, dead in minutes, no trauma, no signs of illness. They call it sudden cardiac arrest. No one suspects murder. Not yet. Later that same day, about 12 miles away in Arlington Heights, Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker, leaves work early. He's not feeling well, maybe a cold, maybe stress. He stops at the store, picks up a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol, and goes home. He takes 2 capsules for his discomfort. Within minutes, Adam collapses. By the time his family reaches him, he's gone. Doctors try everything: CPR, oxygen, defibrillation. Nothing works. At the hospital, the Janis family gathers in shock. Adam's wife, Teresa, his brother Stanley, and Stanley's wife Teresa stand together, devastated. The family grieves as the doctors explain that Adam has suffered what appears to be a sudden heart failure. After hours of mourning, the family returns home. Stanley and Teresa, distraught, go to the kitchen. They take Tylenol from the same bottle Adam had used earlier. Moments later, both of them collapse. By evening, 3 members of the Janis family are dead. The paramedics are stunned. We thought we were dealing with grief, one recalled later, but then we realized something was terribly wrong. Elsewhere in the suburbs, similar tragedies unfold. A flight attendant named Paula Prince, 35, is found dead in her Chicago apartment. A mother of 4, Mary Reiner, dies suddenly after taking Tylenol following childbirth. Mary McFarland, 31, a retail worker in Lombard, collapses in the break room after swallowing a couple of capsules for a headache. The link isn't clear at first. Different neighborhoods, different hospitals, different victims. But by the next morning, one nurse notices a coincidence. Every victim had taken extra-strength Tylenol right before death. That's when the pieces begin to align. At the Northwest Community Hospital, Nurse Helen Jensen is the first to suspect a connection. She's attending to the Janis family tragedy when she notices something on the counter, an open bottle of Tylenol. She picks it up, studies it, and something in her gut tells her this isn't right. She calls the police. When investigators from Arlington Heights Police Department arrive, Jensen insists, "It's the Tylenol. I know it." The detectives bag the bottle, send it to the state lab, and wait. Hours later, the results come back. The capsules aren't medicine at all. They contain potassium cyanide, a deadly chemical that kills within minutes. Suddenly, everything makes sense. The unexplained collapses, the rapid deaths, the victims spread across different suburbs, all connected by a single brand of pain reliever. The ordinary has become lethal. By nightfall on September 30th, the news breaks. Tylenol capsules linked to cyanide poisonings in Chicago area. The story races through television, radio, and newspapers. Within hours, pharmacies are stripped of Tylenol products. Hospitals are flooded with calls from frightened citizens. People dump their bottles into the trash. Parents search through medicine cabinets. Police race against time, pulling bottles off shelves, not knowing how many are tainted or how many people have already swallowed death. Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, issues a nationwide warning: do not consume any Tylenol capsules. The company begins recalling every bottle in circulation, an unprecedented move. 7 deaths, hundreds hospitalized out of fear, and a nation on edge. The FBI, the FDA, and local law enforcement join forces. They call it Operation Tylenol. Each recovered bottle is carefully cataloged. Investigators find that only a few bottles, all purchased from different stores in the Chicago area, contain the deadly poison. The cyanide capsules are not from the factory. Someone had tampered with them after distribution, removing the capsules, filling them with poison, and returning them to store shelves. A faceless killer, striking at random. Their weapon? Fear. "We're looking for someone who understands chemistry," said one FBI agent. Someone organized. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As the days pass, more evidence surfaces, but the mystery only deepens. There's no pattern in the victims, no connection between them, no motive anyone can understand. Who would poison strangers and why? Halloween decorations still hang in shop windows, but Chicago is a city paralyzed. Police cars patrol the streets. Pharmacies keep empty shelves where Tylenol once stood. People are afraid to take even an aspirin. In a televised statement, Chicago Mayor Jane Byrne calls it a public safety crisis unlike anything we've ever faced. Johnson & Johnson Chairman James Burke appears on national TV, assuring the public that the company is cooperating fully and that safety comes before profit. Within days, more than 31 million bottles of Tylenol, worth over $100 million, are recalled and destroyed. The company's reputation is in peril, but so is America's trust in its most familiar medicine. Then a new twist. On October 1st, Johnson & Johnson receives a letter addressed to the company's headquarters. It reads, "Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide into capsules sitting on store shelves. If you want to stop the killing, wire $1 million to the following account number." The letter is signed, Tylenol Killer. Authorities now realize they're dealing not just with a murderer, but an extortionist, someone threatening to continue unless paid. The FBI traces a letter to a man named James William Lewis, living in New York. When they knock on his door, he denies being the poisoner. He admits writing the letter, but claims it was only to draw attention to his financial grievances with Johnson & Johnson. He's arrested for extortion, but not for murder. To this day, no evidence directly ties Lewis to the actual poisoning. By mid-October, the immediate threat fades. No new deaths are reported, but the damage is done. America will never look at a pill bottle the same way again. The Tylenol murders change everything: packaging, production, consumer trust. Within months, tamper evidence seals become mandatory. Capsule medicines are replaced with solid tablets. Federal anti-tampering laws are passed, making product contamination a serious federal crime. But even with new safety measures, the question lingers. Who poisoned those 7 innocent people, and why? As Chicago begins to heal, investigators start piecing together the human element. The families left behind, the corporate decisions made under pressure, and the suspect who would emerge from the shadows. October 1982. Chicago is a city living on edge. 7 lives have been lost to an invisible killer. The culprit, still at large. As the panic spreads beyond Illinois, the investigation turns into one of the largest criminal manhunts in U.S. history. Hundreds of agents, local detectives, and chemists begin a desperate search, not just for who did it, but how it was done. This is the hour where the story shifts from tragedy pursuit. The investigation begins with chaos. Every bottle, every store, every warehouse becomes a crime scene. By October 2nd, the FBI, the FDA, and local police set up a command center in Arlington Heights. Evidence from multiple jurisdictions floods in thousands of Tylenol bottles, each sealed in plastic bags and numbered for analysis. FBI agent Roy Lane later recalled, "We weren't chasing a person. We were chasing a shadow that had already vanished." Every recovered bottle is cataloged. Technicians in white lab coats work around the clock. Some are clean, others deadly. The poison bottles come from different stores, different batches, and different production plants, meaning the tampering occurred after the product left Johnson & Johnson's control. The killer had walked into ordinary stores, opened the bottles, filled the capsules with cyanide, resealed them, and placed them back on the shelves, blending death among everyday medicine. A random act of mass murder. The state toxicology lab in Chicago becomes the epicenter of the investigation. Chemists study the capsules under microscopes, analyzing the fine powder that killed so swiftly. Potassium cyanide, a chemical used in industrial processes like jewelry making and photography. Just 1 grain the size of a salt crystal can kill a human in seconds. Inside each tainted capsule, investigators find 45 milligrams of cyanide, enough to kill not 1 person but several. Dr. Thomas Kim, one of the examining toxicologists, later described the shock of that discovery. It wasn't accidental. This was deliberate, cold, and precise. Whoever did it wanted people to die instantly. The bottles are traced back through distribution channels. They find no contamination at the manufacturing plants, no tampering in transit. That means the killer worked on a retail level, walking store aisles like any shopper, planting poison in plain sight. As this realization spreads, the public's fear becomes palpable. Parents empty medicine cabinets. Hospitals receive hundreds of false alarms. News broadcasts warn, do not consume any capsule medications, not just Tylenol, until further notice. Johnson & Johnson's product is wiped from shelves across America. Rival brands also suffer as consumers lose faith in all over-the-counter drugs. In Chicago, grocery stores lock away their medications behind counters. Clerks wear gloves to handle return bottles. Police drive through neighborhoods using bullhorns to warn residents. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take anything that looks like it. At Johnson & Johnson headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey, panic turns into crisis management. CEO James Burke faces a choice: protect the brand or protect the public. He chooses the latter. The company pulls every bottle of Tylenol from stores nationwide, over 31 million bottles, at a cost exceeding $100 million. They cooperate fully with the FBI, sharing production data, shipping records, and batch codes. In press conferences, Burke reassures the nation, We will not rest until the person responsible is found. Internally, the company begins developing tamper-proof packaging, triple seal bottles, foil protection, and glued boxes. But for now, the world wants one thing: the killer's name. Then comes a break, or what seems like one. On October 1st, just 2 days after the first deaths, Johnson & Johnson receives a typed letter. It reads, "Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide into capsules sitting on store shelves. If you want to stop the killing, wire $1 million to the following account number. If you don't, more deaths will follow." The signature, Tylenol Killer. The letter is immediately turned over to the FBI. Agents trace the bank account number to James William Lewis, a 36-year-old man living in New York City. When they arrive at his apartment, Lewis doesn't flee. He invites them in. Calm, composed. He admits writing the letter, but insists he had nothing to do with the poisonings. He claims it was a business tactic, a way to expose what he says was a dispute with Johnson & Johnson over unpaid wages. Investigators are skeptical. They find evidence tying Lewis to the extortion attempt, but not to the cyanide itself. No cyanide, no Tylenol bottles, no fingerprints on the recovered capsules. Lewis is charged with extortion and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. But the murder case remains open. The killer still unidentified. In the weeks that follow, fear spreads beyond Chicago. Across the country, reports of suspected poisonings flood in. Most turn out to be false alarms, but some are real. In California, a woman claims her aspirin was tampered with. In New York, a bottle of Excedrin tests positive for cyanide, though unrelated to the Chicago case. By 1986, copycat poisonings appear sporadically, some hoaxes, some deadly. The Tylenol murders have unleashed a wave of paranoia and imitation. Police begin profiling potential suspects: a disgruntled chemist, a factory worker with access to cyanide, someone seeking revenge against Johnson & Johnson, or perhaps, as one agent said, just someone who wanted to watch the world panic. Over the next months, dozens of suspects are investigated. Among them, Roger Arnold, a dock worker and amateur chemist from Chicago; James Lewis, already in prison for extortion; unknown retail tamperers, theorized by the FBI to be multiple individuals acting independently. Roger Arnold becomes a central focus after he's overheard bragging in a bar about knowing who did it. Police search his home and find a small chemistry set, including potassium cyanide. But there's no direct link to Tylenol. No capsules, no evidence of tampering. Arnold insists he's innocent. He's released and later, in a tragic twist, kills a man he wrongly believes turned him into police. The case grows colder with every lead. As the investigation drags on, the media plays a powerful role, both informative and damaging. TV anchors speculate about everything from corporate sabotage to terrorism. Newspapers publish theories about shadowy organizations. The phrase Tylenol Killer becomes part of American vocabulary. For the families of the victims, it's a daily torment. They watch the headlines, the press conferences, the rumors, but see no justice. Dennis Kellerman, Mary Kellerman's father, later said, "We just wanted answers, not attention, just to know who could do something like this to a 12-year-old. As months pass, something remarkable happens. The tragedy triggers a revolution in product safety. Congress passes the Federal Anti-Tampering Act of 1983, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. The FDA mandates tamper-evident packaging for all over-the-counter drugs. Johnson & Johnson reintroduces Tylenol with new triple seal protection, a glued box, a plastic neck seal, and a foil seal over the bottle's mouth. The public slowly regains trust. Within a year, Tylenol returns to being the country's leading pain reliever. Not because of marketing, but because of transparency. It's a rare case where a company's honesty in crisis rebuilds its brand. But for the victims' families, closure never comes. By 1984, the FBI has conducted over 400 interviews and tested tens of thousands of Tylenol bottles. No solid suspect. No confession. No DNA. It's 1982, long before genetic forensics. Agents begin to doubt they'll ever solve it. The Killer's Act was simple, efficient, and random. No traceable motive, no connection between victims. He could have been anyone, one investigator later reflected. He could have walked past you in the store. In the years that follow, leads dry up and agents are reassigned. The case file grows dusty, though never officially closed. The Tylenol murders remain an open wound, one that changed the way Americans view safety, trust, and the unseen hand behind everyday products. The investigation has stalled. The prime suspect sits in prison for extortion, but not for murder. Yet decades later, new technology, new evidence, and new interviews will breathe life back into mystery. 2 decades after the autumn of 1982, the air in Chicago still carries a trace of unease. The Tylenol murders have faded from headlines, but not from memory. 7 names, 7 graves, and a single unanswered question. Who poisoned America's medicine cabinet? For years, the case file sat quietly in FBI storage, sealed in boxes labeled product tampering, Tylenol. But in time, new technology, new detectives, and renewed determination will reopen the wound. And perhaps, finally, bring the truth closer than ever before. By the early 1990s, the Tylenol case has become legend, the subject of documentaries, criminology lectures, and corporate studies in crisis management. Johnson & Johnson is praised for its response. The FDA's tamper evidence seal is now universal. But behind the public progress, families of the victims live with quiet torment. Dennis Kellerman, the father of 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, keeps her photo framed on his mantle. He tells reporters years later, "People say time heals. It doesn't. It just changes how the pain feels." The Janus family, devastated by 3 deaths in one day, rarely speaks publicly. Their tragedy is often referenced in textbooks, but behind every academic citation is real grief. 14 years after the murders, a new wave of investigators within the FBI Chicago field office decides to revisit the Tylenol case. Advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA and chemical analysis, offer hope that old evidence might reveal new clues. Agents comb through thousands of pages of notes, interviews, and lab reports. Among the first questions, could any trace of DNA remain on the recovered Tylenol bottles or capsules? The answer, unfortunately, is uncertain. The capsules were destroyed in the early days of the investigation due to contamination risk. Only the bottle seals, paper evidence, and photographs remain. Still, investigators reanalyze every surviving item, looking for fingerprints, handwriting patterns, even trace materials from the packaging glue. What they find is subtle. A few smudges of partial fingerprints, a trace of an unknown adhesive, and buried deep in the files, an odd connection that had once been dismissed. James William Lewis. Lewis, now released from prison for the extortion charge, has rebuilt a quiet life in the Northeast. He works in computer consulting. He gives interviews occasionally, always denying any role in the poisonings. But the more investigators study him, the stranger he seems. His background is fractured. Born in Missouri in 1946, a history of fraud, tax evasion, and forged documents. A pattern of behavior described by one agent as a fascination with control and attention. During the 1982 investigation, police had found detailed hand-drawn diagrams in his home, including chemical instructions for cyanide reactions. He claimed they were for personal research. To the FBI, Lewis never stopped being a person of interest, even after his extortion conviction. In 1992, he sends a series of letters to various Chicago news outlets, claiming to have a theory about the poisonings and offering to help investigators find the real killer. He calls the murders an act of pure psychological warfare. But when agents contact him for follow-up, he refuses to meet. One FBI memo reads, "Subject appears to be playing a game with investigators. He wants to remain relevant." Still, the coincidences are impossible to ignore. Lewis lived in Chicago in 1982. He had financial disputes with Johnson & Johnson, and he possessed the knowledge to make cyanide. Yet, there's no physical evidence linking him to the poison bottles. As Lewis reemerges in the spotlight, agents also revisit other names from the original investigation. Roger Arnold, the amateur chemist once suspected, has long since faded from view. After serving time for a separate manslaughter charge, he dies quietly in 2008. No connection to the Tylenol case is ever established. Another suspect, Lawrence Massey, a former Johnson & Johnson employee, is briefly considered due to his knowledge of the company's distribution process. But no credible evidence surfaces. The more they look, the clearer it becomes. The killer's identity may have died with the early 1980s. Still, the case refuses to rest. In 2009, the FBI officially reopens the Tylenol murder investigation. This time as a joint effort with local Illinois police and federal prosecutors. Why now? Because new technology in forensic document analysis allows examiners to re-examine Lewis's extortion letter with modern precision. Using high-resolution scanning and ink dating, analysts confirmed that the letter was written within days of the actual murders, not weeks, as Lewis had claimed. That timing puts him directly within the window of the poisonings. Agents travel to Massachusetts, where Lewis and his wife Leanne are living. They seize computers, notebooks, and chemical manuals. He is interviewed again, this time, at length. Lewis maintains his innocence, smiling in interviews, at times mocking the investigators' questions. "If I'd done it," he once said, "don't you think I'd be in prison for murder by now?" The FBI calls his behavior manipulative. But without DNA, fingerprints, or eyewitnesses, they still lack enough to charge him. Retired FBI agent Roy Lane, who worked the original case, expresses what many feel. "We were never chasing a suspect. We were chasing a ghost. You can't interrogate fear." The Tylenol murders, in many ways, create a new type of crime, one where the killer doesn't target individuals, but society itself. Modern investigators begin to look at the case through a new lens, as domestic terrorism before the term existed. A psychological assault meant to cause panic, distrust, and disruption. It was one man's act, one agent said, but it changed an entire nation's behavior overnight. That shift in perspective helps explain why. Even decades later, the case remains active. As the investigation stalls again, the Tylenol murders become cultural history, taught in universities, referenced in media ethics courses, and cited in corporate crisis manuals. In 1982, it was the first televised national panic of the modern age. Before social media, before 24-hour news cycles. People watched, horrified, as the simple act of taking a pain reliever became a potential death sentence. The legacy of that fear shaped how companies, consumers, and governments react to crises ever since. Every sealed soda can, every tamper band, every safety cap owes its existence to what happened in Chicago. But for detectives and for the families, that legacy feels hollow. Because despite decades of innovation, no one has ever been held responsible. In 2012, 30 years after the murders, the victims' families gather for a small memorial in Arlington Heights. They share memories, grief, and lingering frustration. Patricia Prince, sister flight attendant Paula Prince, tells reporters, "We don't need another safety seal. We need a name. We need justice." Mary Reiner's husband, speaking softly, adds, "I still can't take medicine without opening the bottle twice. Once to check it, once to be sure." Their words echo what countless Americans still feel, a loss of trust that began in those terrifying days of 1982. In 2013, federal agents once again meet with James Lewis in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Now in his late 60s, Lewis agrees to speak. On the record, he walks them through his version of events, how he saw the panic unfold, how he claims he was fascinated by the case, and how the extortion letter was a stupid stunt. He smiles often during questioning. When asked if he regrets writing the letter, he says, "Regret? Sure, but not guilt." Agents leave with more frustration than answers. Years later, when Lewis dies in 2023 at the age of 76, the FBI quietly acknowledges that the primary suspect in the Tylenol murders is gone, without ever being charged. And with him, perhaps, the truth. Today, the Tylenol murders remain officially unsolved. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no confirmed motive. What remains are the ripples in law, medicine, manufacturing, and collective memory. The Tylenol case taught America that evil doesn't always wear a face. Sometimes it hides behind the ordinary, a medicine bottle, a brand, a symbol of trust. In the words of one FBI veteran, it was the perfect crime because it was random. You can't profile random. By the time the last funerals were held in October 1982, America had already changed. What began as 7 sudden deaths in suburban Chicago had become a national reckoning, a confrontation with the vulnerability hidden inside every household product. This hour isn't about who did it. It's about what the murders left behind, the permanent mark they carved into business, law, medicine, and the collective psyche of a nation that learned, almost overnight, that trust could be fatal. It's hard to imagine now, but before 1982, over-the-counter medicine bottles were simple, often just a lid and a label. No seals, no plastic wraps, no glued boxes. That ended after the Tylenol murders. Within months, Johnson & Johnson unveiled something revolutionary. Tamper-evident packaging, a glued outer box, a plastic neckband, a foil seal covering the mouth of the bottle. That triple protection became the new industry standard. What started as a desperate corporate response became the new language of consumer safety. Visible proof that a product had not been touched. Today, those little plastic seals are so ordinary we barely notice them. But every one of them traces back to those 7 deaths in Chicago. The shock wave wasn't just corporate, it was legal. In 1983, Congress passed a federal anti-tampering act, making it a federal offense to alter or contaminate consumer products. Before that law, the Tylenol killer could have been charged only with state-level homicide. After it, such crimes carried the weight of federal jurisdiction and harsher penalties, even the death sentence in some cases. The statute was designed to deter product terror, a phrase born from this case. To this day, it remains one of the few laws written in direct response to a single unsolved crime. The Tylenol murders also transformed how media covered crisis. In 1982, there was no internet, no social media. But television networks, particularly local Chicago affiliates, became the first responders of information. Breaking news segments interrupted soap operas and nightly dramas. Anchors urged viewers to check their medicine cabinets immediately. CBS anchor Dan Rather said on air, "The Tylenol case is a reminder that terror can come in the most ordinary forms." News stations scramble for updates. Images of store shelves being cleared aired nightly. Within 48 hours, the story was national. Within 72, it was global. For the first time, a localized crime had created a nationwide media panic, accelerated by television. In many ways, this was the first modern viral crime story before the word viral existed. When the crisis began, Johnson & Johnson faced a nightmare. A beloved product turned weapon, stock prices plummeting and public trust collapsing. Yet, what the company did next would become a business case, studied for decades. Instead of denial, they chose transparency. They stopped production, issued public warnings, and recalled every bottle of Tylenol, 31 million units, even before all the facts were known. When executives appeared on television, they spoke not of profits, but of responsibility. CEO James Burke said, "No business success is worth a human life." That decision cost millions, but it saved the company. Within a year, Tylenol returned to store shelves, rebuilt under the promise of safety, and consumers responded. By late 1983, Tylenol regained its market share. Business schools today call it the Tylenol model. How honesty during catastrophe can resurrect a brand. The legacy wasn't all positive. In the years that followed, dozens of copycat poisonings were reported across the U.S. Some were hoaxes. Others, tragically, were real. 1986, Washington State. A woman named Stella Nickel poisons Excedrin capsules with cyanide, killing 2 people, including her own husband, in an attempt to collect life insurance. She becomes the first person convicted under the new federal tampering law. 1991, Texas. A man contaminates Sudafed packages in a bid to frame a competitor. 2000s. Sporadic reports of tampering continue, though most end as false alarms. Each incident reignites memories of Chicago, reminding the public how thin the line is between safety and sabotage. To psychologists studying mass behavior, the Tylenol murders represent a turning point, where trust became conditional. Dr. Robert Lifton, a psychiatrist who studied the societal effects of terror, once remarked, "The Tylenol killings broke a sacred pact, the idea that what we buy and consume is inherently safe." Before 1982, the consumer world operated on faith. Afterward, it operated on proof. That shift reshaped everything. Not just medicine, but food, cosmetics, and even electronics. Every safety label, every tamper seal, every "do not use if open" sticker, all born from one man's act of invisible violence. Fear, it turned out, could be packaged too. From the ashes of 1982 came an entirely new industry, product security technology. Engineers began designing packaging that couldn't be easily resealed. Pharmaceutical companies developed blister packs, making capsule tampering virtually impossible. The FDA began requiring companies to submit tamper resistance plans. Insurance companies rewrote coverage policies. Retailers introduced lock displays and surveillance in medication aisles. Even the capsule itself, the format used in 1982, was replaced. Johnson & Johnson discontinued the classic powder-filled capsule entirely, switching to solid caplets that couldn't be opened and refilled. The Tylenol case didn't just solve one crime. It rewired the entire concept of consumer protection. But progress came with paranoia. In the years following the murders, police departments were flooded with reports of suspicious medicine bottles, most false. Hospitals wasted valuable resources testing harmless products. People avoided taking medication altogether, fearing contamination. Sociologists call it the contamination effect, when one event permanently changes public perception of safety. In a sense, the killer's work outlived him. He killed 7 people, but frightened millions, and that fear became self-sustaining. He weaponized trust, one FBI profiler said years later, and we're still living with the aftermath. Even decades later, Johnson & Johnson couldn't escape the shadow of 1982. Every anniversary brought renewed headlines, documentaries, and questions. Executives who weren't even born at the time of the murder still face inquiries from journalists. Shareholders still ask, could it happen again? The company, once lauded for its integrity, has faced unrelated scandals in later years. Opioid lawsuits, talcum powder controversies, but the Tylenol crisis remains its most defining trial. For many, it's a story that defined what corporate ethics should look like in the face of terror. For decades later, the Tylenol murders remain both unsolved and unforgettable. For criminologists, it's the perfect example of anonymous mass homicide, a crime committed without a personal motive, yet with nationwide consequences. For businesses, it's a case study in crisis management. For the families, it's a wound that never closed. But perhaps the deepest legacy is cultural. Because since 1982, every seal bottle, every childproof cap, every safety seal intact label carries a ghost story. A reminder that safety, once lost, can never be fully trusted again. The Tylenol murders weren't just a tragedy. They were a lesson written in poison, sealed in plastic, and remembered through every tiny seal we break open to this day. The killer may have vanished, but the fear he created, that lives on. If you found this story as haunting as the truth it carries, make sure you subscribe, because the past has a way of resurfacing, and sometimes the next mystery begins where the last one never ended.